Hey, what's up everybody? GameDad here, coming at you guys with part 3 of my Atari 2600 collection. Now, we are starting to near the end, so we are getting down to the final games in the collection. We'll have one more video after this, but for now, let's check out what's in this one. Released in 1983 by Atari, Moon Patrol is a side-scrolling shooter where you pilot a vehicle that has the ability to jump on command. Mountain King was released by CBS Toys in 1983. Unfortunately, this was one of a few games in this video where my Retron 77 couldn't capture the footage. Mousetrap is a Pac-Man style clone released in 1981 by Exidy Incorporated. This game is very simple in concept. You are the mouse, don't get caught by the cats. Released for the 2600 by Atari in 1982, Ms. Pac-Man takes a lot of what was wrong with the Pac-Man port and makes it much better. While still not as good as the arcade version, this is a pretty good port. In Night Driver, released in 1978 by Atari, you race on a black track to simulate nighttime driving. I found this game to actually be pretty fast-paced and hard to control at times. Omega Race was released in 1981 by Bally Midway and is unfortunately another game that the Retron 77 was unable to load. Othello was released in 1980 by Atari and is a puzzle-based game where you must place light or dark pieces while trying to capture the other player's pieces for your own. Outlaw was released by Atari in 1978 and is a one-on-one shootout style game. Players must shoot the player on the other side of the screen before getting shot themselves. Although Pac-Man, released for the 2600 by Atari in 1981, is an absolutely iconic arcade game, this port, in my opinion, leaves a lot to be desired. The port is buggy and is graphically subpar, but at least you got Pac-Man at home, right? In Pele's Soccer, released in 1981 by Atari, you play a 3-on-3 game of soccer where the player controls the entire team at once. The concept behind this was a little strange at first, but I actually ended up liking how it played. Pengo is a fun little Sega game that was licensed for the 2600 by Atari in 1984. In the game, you play as a penguin either breaking or moving blocks of ice around to defeat the enemies on the screen. Pitfall is another classic released by Activision in 1982. With the ability to go above or below ground, jump obstacles, and swing from vines, it's no wonder that this game was such a huge hit. With Pitfall 2 Lost Caverns, released by Activision in 1982, being a fun follow-up to the first Pitfall game, I was bummed to see that the Retron 77 wasn't able to play the game. Planet Patrol was released by Spectra Video International in 1983 and plays a lot like Defender in the sense that you can travel back and forth as you take out enemies and avoid obstacles. Here is another arcade port from the 2600 era. Popeye, released by Nintendo in 1983, is yet another game that my Retron 77 was unable to capture footage for. This is an actual arcade machine I would love to own someday. Until then, I'll just stick with the ones that I have. Q*bert is a great platformer/puzzle game that was released by Parker Brothers in 1983. In this game, you play as a small creature that is trying to light up all of the tiles on the screen while avoiding the enemies. Next up is Race, released in 1977 by Atari. This is probably one of my oldest games in my collection. This game is actually a lot of fun and is one of my only 2600 games that supports the driving controller. Raiders of the Lost Ark for the 2600 was released by Atari in 1982. I must admit I didn't really understand what was happening in the game and had a lot of trouble trying to figure out how to proceed past the first screen. Now this game I had a lot of fun with. Real Sports Boxing, released by Atari in 1987, was colorful and fast-paced. I had a blast moving around the ring and throwing punches every chance I got. Super fun game. Another real sports game, Football, was released by Atari in 1982 and has a much more realistic look and feel than other sports games from this same era. With a full field of play and multiple team members on the field, it was a lot of fun to play. My last 2600 real sports game is Tennis. This game was released in 1983 by Atari, and it shows. This is when these games started becoming more colorful and fast-paced. With a 3D-like playfield, it felt very realistic for the time period that it was released. Next up is another game from Imagic. Riddle of the Sphinx was released in 1982 and is actually a pretty fun puzzle adventure game. It's colorful and has a decent amount going on. I wish the sprites had a little more to their movement, but it was good. River Raid was released by Activision in 1982 and is another great example of what that company was capable of. This vertical scrolling shoot 'em up is a lot of fun and has an interesting fuel mechanic that has you constantly having to shoot fuel tanks on screen to stay airborne. Activision released Sequest in 1983, and I've got to say, it's pretty fun. You play as a submarine that is rescuing divers while avoiding obstacles like sharks, all while monitoring oxygen levels. Skiing was released by Activision in 1980 and is another game in this video that the Retron 77 couldn't play. I'm not sure why it has issues with some games and not others, but at least the majority of my collection could be captured, which is still awesome. Skydiver was released in 1979 by Atari, and the game is just that, skydiving. You base when you will jump off of the windsock blowing at the bottom of the screen. You then launch the skydiver to get them to land on the pad at the bottom. Released in 1978 by Atari, Slot Racers was actually made by Warren Robinette, who later made Adventure, the first game to ever have an Easter egg hidden in it. Sneak and Peek, released by the U.S. Games Corporation in 1982, is literally a game of hide and seek. I thought this was a pretty cool idea to put into a video game. I don't think I've ever seen something like this anywhere else. In Sorcerer, released by Mythicon in 1983, you play as just that, a sorcerer. From what I can tell, your character is riding a magic carpet while side-scrolling through levels and avoiding obstacles and enemies in his path. Space Attack was released by Mattel in 1982 and was actually pretty difficult for me to find info on. I didn't really understand the gameplay, unfortunately, so who knows. It could have been fun, and I just didn't know how to take advantage of that. Odds are, if you had a 2600, you had Space Invaders. Released by Atari in 1978, this classic arcade port, while not as visually appealing, is still a lot of fun. I had a blast taking out wave after wave of aliens. Space Jockey was released in 1982 by the U.S. Games Corporation and is the last game in this video that the Retron 77 was unable to run. Hopefully moving forward, Hyperkin can patch the system to allow it to work with more of the 2600 library, but until then, I'll just stick to my 2600 to play this one. The last game for this video is Space War. This game was released by Atari in 1978 and has a very Asteroids feel to it, just without the asteroids. You play as a small ship that is flying around trying to take out the other player on the screen while firing a weapon that seems to bounce around the screen. Now that's going to wrap up part 3 of my Atari 2600 collection. Now we got one more video coming out for you guys in the future that'll showcase the last bits of the collection. Now if you like what you saw, as always, don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons down below and hit that notification bell. That way you get alerted every time we got a new video coming out. Now, as always, I'm GameDad. I thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you later.